Welcome to Let's Get Writing. I'm so happy to be here. And I'm your host, Catherine Taylor. It's a new year and so many stories to share on the program. And thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Here is where you can find inspiration and ideas and meet the people behind the stories. We bring life to books and so much more. And Let's Get Writing is available each week live on my Facebook page at Catherine Taylor Media, and all shows are permanently hosted on my YouTube channel at Catherine Taylor TV. And if you like your content on the go, we're on the popular platforms for podcasts. Now, let's get to the fun part. My guests this week are the co-authors of My Indian. And not only have they contributed to the creation of this book, but they are each in their own capacities leaders dedicated to the empowerment of the Mi'kmaq First People in Newfoundland and Labrador. Now, I could dedicate a large part of this introduction to their accomplishments, and I invite you to read more on my Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn pages. But now I want to welcome them to Let's Get Writing, where they can tell you their stories. And so let's bring them up here. Welcome to the show. We have Chief Misael Joe and Sheila O'Neill. How are you?
Good, I'm good.
Good,
Thank you.
we've got your audio. Excellent. Yes. Now we're coming to you from Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm in Grand Falls, Windsor, and Chief is in Conn River, and Sheila, you're out there, way out in the ocean in St. John's. So we have the island almost covered, similar to Sylvester in your book. My Indian, this is the book we're talking about today. Well, I'm so happy to have you here on the show. And you've been, I'm going to hold it up, you've been on the cover of the Newfoundland Herald, and now you're here on Let's Get Writing. And I gave a brief introduction to each of you, and there's so many things that you have been doing. But I'd like to start by asking you to talk about the project and why it started, why it came about. And let's make this easy. I'll start with you, Chief.
Okay, well, for my part, it started 200 years ago with my relative that guided Cormac across Newfoundland. And I've heard the stories for years and years, and finally decided that it was time to do something about it. No known history that I could find that tells Sylvester's true story. So we sort of had to go with the historical fiction version and sort of create a person and then create a story around that. And this where Sheila comes in, of course, and to be the co-writer, co-author. I keep telling her I'm the storyteller. You're the writer in this partnership.
Well, you know, every partnership has to have a balance.
Oh, absolutely.
And if you both came in with the same skills, well, that might not work out as well. But Sheila, how about for you? How did were you approached by Chief, or did you run across this over a coffee? How did it all get started?
Oh, well, I was at Powwow in Conn River, and Chief approached me and said, "I've got a project I'm wondering you might be interested in talking to me about." And I said, "Sure." So I grabbed what I call a scribbler and a pen and went over to his house and sat out on the deck. And he said, "Sheila, I've got an idea and I'd like you to help me put it together." And he was telling me the story of Sylvester Joe and how he wanted to write the story. And I started scratching down notes as fast as I could as he was talking. And I said, "My goodness, you've got the entire outline of the book right here already." And so that was July of 2017. And so it began.
And so it began. That's when I was wondering. And it's interesting that when you talk about the oral tradition, which is a big part of your culture and actually the culture of Newfoundland, but that gave you that outline just by sitting down and talking to him.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Chief, had you been telling the story yourself for many years?
Absolutely. And listening to the story and telling myself the story. My first book that I wrote, actually, I told myself the story on a tape recorder and then later I had it published. But this was a little easier to some degree. I would tell Sheila the story and she would try and write it, keep up with me, but I get so wrapped up in the story at times I forget that she's typing this while I'm talking, and didn't always make for a good laugh.
Probably improve your skills, Sheila.
Many skills were improved in the making of this book.
Yeah, well, okay, so this is how it started. It started on the back deck, and then from there, you had to, I guess, take it into a different format. You had to edit, you had to find a publisher, the whole journey. Let's talk a little bit about that. How did it move along?
From my part, that I would write, and my wife would do the first edit on that, and then she would send that to Sheila. And sometimes we would actually be on the phone, FaceTime, doing some work. And when I went to town on business, I would show up at her house and we would do some more work. And sometimes it would be paper all over the floor that were taking pieces out, putting pieces in. And sometimes the time went so fast that you all day sometimes trying to get this done and take parts out and make sure that it all fit together in a order that I didn't make sense. I could tell a story, but they don't always jive the way a proper writer could make it happen. That was Sheila's part, and of course along the way we just let's eyes at me sometimes. What are you talking about now?
So Sheila, you had to take the ingredients,
Yes,
and make the cake, so to speak.
yes,
Yeah.
and connect everything. And Chief didn't. We didn't write the story in order of chapter 1, 2, 3, 4. There were bits and pieces of the story that Chief would be inspired, and he'd say, "Well, let's write this one," or "I've been really working," or "I've had some ideas on this one, so that might be chapter 8." And then the next one would be chapter 2, and the next one would be chapter 11. So that was part of it. The whole story was there, but connecting it and making sure that there were no inconsistencies and that it flowed. And then, of course, putting in all of the Mi'kmaq words and all those other bits as well.
Yeah, and the book is it's quite informative to anyone reading. There, in the back there are words and numbers and giving you the different guide through there, and there's some photographs and questions and all kinds of interesting things that make it's a wonderful read, a story that it touches on things that are so important, the environment, things that were important to Sylvester, and certainly the preservation of the Beothics and all of that. And then you take it and you put it in. It's such a beautiful read, and then it's almost a way to learn more about the culture. And what I wanted to ask you, when you wrote it, why did you write it? Was that what you hoped to spread the word about Sylvester? And yes, go ahead.
Yeah, we wanted to bring Sylvester to life, and we've always known about him, but nothing was ever written about it except for what Cormac wrote. And that, he had an old journal put together. Not a lot about Sylvester, even though at the time, I would think 200 years ago, Sylvester was as close to an Aboriginal doctor as you can get in terms of the medicines that they saw and all the things that they were looking at. He had Cormac didn't pay any attention to any of those things, and he wrote a lot of things in Latin and talked about the plants. And at one time, he actually talked about you having a caribou farm set up and bringing in people from Lapland to be herders, and so it made for an interesting discussion all the way across. And of course, we followed Cormac's journal almost page by page, because it was written in a way where they had marked out their campsites. So we wanted to make sure that when Cormac was writing in his journal, that Sylvester was writing on his stick, because at that time he carried a stick with him, so it was his I guess travel stick, and so his journey was marked out on a stick while Cormac wrote in his journal.
And to his people, reading that stick would be the same thing. He could tell the story directly from that, the same as we would pick up a book. I thought that was so interesting. And I personally was so frustrated by Cormac's attitude toward the help that Sylvester wanted to bring him, with the plants and with ways to stay warm and safe. And he was so resistant to that. And actually, I'm not sure if I, right off the top, had explained what this is, but it's a story of Sylvester Joe, who was the Mi'kmaq guide who was hired to take Cormac across Newfoundland. And, interestingly enough, as the book starts, he wanted Sylvester to prove that he was capable of doing this journey, and thus delayed it to the point that they hit some bad weather. Arrogant, I guess, would be the word that comes to mind when I think of Cormac. So their interchange throughout the story is quite engaging, and taking us on that kind of journey too, how they reacted. And
it's interesting that when you look to Cormac Journal, that he always referred to Sylvester as my Indian.
Mm-hmm.
Right off from the gate out, it was something that I didn't like at all. Growing up, I've heard it, and racism is alive and well, and that was evident in the book. And Cormac looked at him nothing less than a servant, no better than a mule. I have to try them out to see if they're any good before I take you on this journey. Even though he had walked from Conn River to St. John's, that's over 250 miles from Conn River. Then take him on a 100-mile journey just to see if he was any good as a guide and as someone that'll carry a bigger load. So then refer to him as my Indian.
And I wanted to ask you both about that, the title of the book, My Indian, because I know that you together had some discussion about that. So Sheila, what do you have to say about the title?
Well, right from that first meeting on the deck, Chief had a copy of Cormac's journal, and we were sort of looking through it. And every time he'd read My Indian, and this proceeded throughout the writing process, if he came across those words, he'd just fling the book. He'd just get so frustrated at times he'd throw it. And I said, right from that very first day, I said, I know what the title of this book has to be. It has to be My Indian. And he said, no. I said, no, really. We want to reclaim the narrative. I know it's going to be controversial, so I guess I talked Chief into it, and then we talked Breakwater into it, because we want to reclaim the narrative, and we want people to understand that this was the norm at the time, to refer to your guide in that way. 27 times right from page 1 in the original journal. Cormac called Sylvester my Indian. And Sylvester Joe is a person of national historic significance for being one of the very first Mi'kmaq guides. And so on the one hand, you have this human who's got, such a designation, and yet his name was, Cormac rarely used his name.
Actually, there was, I think I have it marked, it was in page 43. And the test of fidelity. But the next day, I may not say this correctly, Suliawe returned to St. John's, where he finally met up with Cormac. Cormac said to Suliawe, from now on, you will be my Indian. Suliawe responded, my name is not my Indian. My church name is Sylvester. Cormac said, I will call you Sylvester, but nevertheless, you're my Indian. Again, Suliawe said, I'm not your Indian. Cormac replied, you're my Indian. And that was the opening of that chapter. And I noted it because I knew we were going to talk about the title, and just the feeling you have from reading that he did not respect him as Sylvester. It was just someone who was going to help him go across the island. Mm-hmm. Actually, he made a good choice, because I don't think he would have made it. He did do that.
Well, he also, Sylvester also started calling Cormac El Glazio, which means white man, my white man. So, and he didn't give Cormac a translation. He just continued to call him that.
Mm-hmm. He said that, it means you're my boss.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, yeah. But, and so when Sheila was pushing for you to take this title for the cover of the book, did you push back, or did you see her point of view right away?
No, I don't think I pushed back at all. It was a good title, and we knew we were going to create a little bit of fuss around. And of course, I've been for years talking about the racism and prejudice that we deal with every day as Aboriginal people, and have a book that we wrote called My Indian, sort of jumping right into the fire. But it was a good timing when the book came out at the time when the problems of Newfoundland would change the Red Indian Lake to from that to another name, which is now the Biotic Lake, I believe it is called. So the two sort of came together, and that helped, I think.
Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to bring I'm not sure how this is going to play out on the screen. I'm trying to show this in the stream. There we go. There is the cover of the book, because I wanted to also mention that the artist for this cover, Jerry Evans, and he's a Mi'kmaq artist who was born and raised here in central Newfoundland. Mm-hmm. And you pointed out to me the other day some of the things in this cover that I wish you would share with the audience.
Okay, so when Jerry did the cover work for us, he made sure that the clothing was historically accurate. So the clothing, the skin boots that you see that Sylvester is wearing and that Cormac is wearing would be accurate to the time. Also, you can see right behind Sylvester is his bundle, and that bundle is a replica of Chief Joe's actual bundle, which is available for viewing in the rooms. And so even, the axe and basically the setting. And also, if you look way off in the distance, I'm not sure if you can see it on the screen, but if you look at the actual cover, you can see smoke in the distance, and that's significant to the story.
Right. That could be the biopic that he was not going to lead Cormac to.
Yes. And even if you notice in the title of the title, there's an eel spear motif there, which was part of the design process by the great folks at Breakwater. And an eel spear is significant as well, because crossed eel spears represent being able to care for your family, feed your family, and they would have been used at the time as well.
Interesting. Well, now the book itself, and I also have I downloaded here a study guide, and I have a copy I'm going to put up just for everyone to see. And here we go, back again. So the book is so much more than just a book. It's a beautiful read. It's not a long read, and as you had said, Chief, you didn't want it to be too long of a story. And but there's also a study guide. So let's talk about that a little bit. Where is this book going to go?
Well, we're really hoping that it goes into the school curriculum, in the junior high school curriculum. Breakwater was seeing interest from some folks here in the province, some in education, including Memorial University, by the way, and thought maybe a study guide would be timely, a free downloadable study guide with hot links that take you to audio and video and maps and so on. So that study guide is available free. It covers a lot of the social learning. There's geography and history. There's art in there, and I think it's a really good accompaniment to the book, particularly if someone is interested in bringing it into the classroom and aren't quite sure where to start or what resources can be used to go along with the book.
Wonderful. And I had actually had it online, and it's wonderful that you can read and link. It just takes you in so much deeper. But not just that. I think just the book itself as it stands. What are you hoping people to take away from reading it, the broader audience of people who can purchase this book?
For me, it would be the environmental things that we talked about in the book, and how our life, in comparison to the non-Aboriginal lifestyle, was so different in how we lived on the land and used the land and the resources that land gave us. In one of the earlier chapters, when he went up the coast, they were observing that there were boatloads of people going out to rob the eggs from the colonies along the coast. And our people, I was with my grandfather at one time, and we found a goose nest, And my question is, why not take them all? They said, no, no, no. We need to come back. They need to come back every year, and this you don't do that. And so Sylvester would have been amazed at that time in 200 years ago that people were actually killing off wild birds by taking all the eggs. That includes seagulls and the great hawk and a lot of other birds that was around at the time.
I think that message comes through very strongly in the book, to respect the environment and where we live and the land from which we come. Sheila, you look like you have something to add.
Well, I do. For me, I think it's really important that any reader considers the source of what they're reading. I know that myself, along with many others in this province, were taught in the grade 5 history book that the Mi'kmaq were brought over by the French to kill off the Beothuk. And, that misconcept, that construct has really stuck. And people believe that the Mi'kmaq were never on this island. We were not indigenous to this island, which is, of course, not true. And that's known as the mercenary myth. And there's nothing in history to back that up, except that it was written in an educational textbook. And so I would challenge readers to look at who's writing the book, from what perspective, and to consider, just because William Cormack, with all of his honors and distinctions, wrote a journal, doesn't mean that what he has written tells the true story.
And this is something that came to mind as I was reading and researching this material, is that your history has always been, or most often, an oral tradition, and now you are taking it and writing your own history. Has this been done before, or are you really breaking ground here?
In Newfoundland, maybe, but not in other parts of the Maritimes. There's been books written by well-known authors, and Daniel Paul, We Were Not the Savages, come to mind as one of the books that has been written. But there's not enough, certainly not enough Mi'kmaq or Aboriginal writers in Newfoundland. Maybe this will help to change some of our younger people's mind and start to do some of this work as well.
Absolutely a great idea, and I could see that coming from this. It would inspire confidence and ideas and validity of why these stories are important to be told. Yeah, very much so. So now that you have this book under your belt and out into the world where people can read it and classrooms can share in it, what's coming next? Do you have plans for anything else?
Already started the sequel to this one, because there's a time when Cormac and Sylvester parted ways in St. George's Bay, where Cormac went off in different routes and Sylvester stuck around for a little while and then decided he would go back and take a look at some other things that he wanted to see. So I'm not going to give away too much of the sequel, but it is in the works.
And Sheila, you're involved with that as well?
Oh, yes. So it's going to start in 1822 when Sylvester leaves Cormac, and it's going to cover the period from 1822 to 1828. In history, that's the only other reference to Sylvester Joe, when Cormac approaches him and asks him to accompany him to Red Indian Lake. And that's the time when Cormac takes the skulls back to Scotland for study, the Beothuk skulls. So we're gonna give, this is going to be not a historical fiction, but more fiction, perhaps, where we're going to create the environment that Sylvester lives in and travels in from 1822 to 1828.
And it's already started.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think your spring and summer is going to certainly be occupied.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Now, Chief Joe, you began in 2014 working on the repatriation of the Beothuk remains that were taken back at that time. And, how was that experience for you? And I mean, it's just been amazing. The first steps have been taken. It's not completed yet, but what?
No, well, it started before 14, actually. It started a long time ago when I was asked to be part of the Beothuk Institute. And at the time, I asked the folks around the table if we should not go to Scotland to demand those remains be brought back to Newfoundland. And of course, nobody would do that or didn't want to do it or couldn't do it. So finally, in 2014, I decided it was enough and I needed to do this. So after making some contact with the museum in Edinburgh, decided I would go down and make the first attempt anyway. And that's where I started from. And then finally, after constant badgering, I guess, in writing, getting governments involved and other people involved in Scotland too as well, it finally happened.
Hmm. And they are now at the rooms.
Yes.
Yes. And do you hope to bring them to their final resting place? Is that the ultimate goal for you?
I honestly don't know at this stage. It would be an incredible thing to do, but those remains are so famous at this stage that you'd almost be afraid to put them out where they can be stolen again. But I'm sure there's ways of protecting them if we need to do that.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you both so much for the time coming here on the show to talk about the book. And certainly, are there any final thoughts or words that you'd like to share with people on this topic and around the book?
For me, I would want people to read the book and then start calling filmmakers. It would make a great movie.
We talked about that. It would make a great movie, and just that journey across the island might be a little more challenging in some places. Well, not really, if you think what they traveled over.
Yeah, now,
yeah,
the flooding in a lot of those areas now, and I guess if you had a canoe at every lake that you had to cross where they walked, that would be one way of doing it.
Yeah, that could work. Yeah. And Sheila, any final words for people?
Well, I just, again, as Chief said, I encourage people to pick up the book and read it. It's not a long read. People that have read it have said it sounds like they can hear someone reading it to them, which I thought was one of the greatest compliments. And enjoy it. And hopefully, if any teachers are listening, we would love it if you brought it into your classrooms. And we might even be delighted to be guest speakers if that's a thing.
Oh, well, you'd be wonderful guest speakers. I want to thank you so much for your time today and to thank our audience for joining us. And again, I'm going to just pop up my copy, which is well read, and encourage you to take the book and read it. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye now. Thank you for joining us, folks.
Bye.